Hello and salam hormat. I'm NADIAH LATIF and welcome to The Nation right here on Bernama TV. Today we focus on a critical and often overlooked issue, rare diseases and the unique challenges faced by patients not only in Malaysia but also across Asia. With over 300 million people worldwide affected and more than 350 million yet to be diagnosed, equitable access to healthcare remains a significant challenge, particularly in emerging markets and countries. So to shed light on this topic, we are joined with SORAYA BEKKALI, Senior Vice President and Head of EU-CAN and International Business at Alexion, part of AstraZeneca, a group that has been advancing treatments and healthcare for rare diseases across the globe. Thank you for joining us this evening. Hope you're well.
Thank you. No, I'm well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
I heard you said that this is your first trip to Malaysia, so I hope that you're getting all the insights and the information that you're hoping to get.
Yes, it started already this morning. It's been an intense day, and I know there's more engagements planned today and tomorrow, so I'm looking forward to it.
So you said an intense day, so we'll have to have an intense discussion about rare diseases then. Right, let's start straight into it. Let's understand the landscape of rare diseases, not only in Malaysia but across the globe. When we're talking about rare diseases, for example, in Southeast Asia, incomparable to Europe, do you see any differences or opportunities that might stand out? What are the unique challenges and opportunities that this region might have, which you see are different from others?
Sure. I think first I would like to give some background because my journey is contributing already to the insight that I will be sharing with you. So I'm a physician by background, and I initially specialized in clinical pharmacology, which has led me to work in drug development, starting by drug development in the rare disease space. So I have dedicated my career into rare disease on the drug development side, on the medical affairs side, and now more on a more leadership position as part of a company that is dedicating an important part of its R&D investments into rare disease. So I have seen many countries, and I have seen also the evolution of the rare disease ecosystem across the geographies and also over time. There are common issues across the world when it comes to rare disease patients, which is unfortunate. And the number one being there is a very low awareness across general populations, across the medical community, across policymakers about the number of patients affected, about the burden of the burden represented by rare disease, not only for the affected individual, but for the entire family, because often rare disease affects children, 50% of them affect children, so the whole family is being impacted. One of the parents has to stop working. There's a financial, societal burden that affects the family and the caregiver. There is also an insufficient diagnosis, because if physicians don't know about those diseases, of course, there will be a delayed diagnosis. The studies have even recently confirmed that it takes overall 5 years for a patient living with rare disease to finally meet the physician who will know his disease or her disease and be able to propose a diagnosis. And then when you think about the number of rare disease, there are around 7,000 to 10,000 rare disease. Many of them have a genetic background, and today there are only 5% that have a treatment. So those are the common challenges that exist across the world. I think the difference that I see across the world is that some parts of some countries have started putting in place national plans or regional plans. So Europe, for example, in the 80s have established an orphan drug regulation to incentivize companies to invest into the development of drugs that were intended to be used in few hundred and few thousand patients. US have done this, Japan, and then countries have followed that path one by one over time, and we have seen some national plans being established in emerging markets. China in 2018 has created a rare disease list. I know that also Malaysia have taken some steps over the last years. So countries come to that realization one after the other, and which means the challenges are common. They are more acute in some countries than others, for just related to the fact on how did they start to tackle the challenge and to understand that the health of those few hundred, few thousand individuals is as important as the health of the millions or the dozen of thousand patients who suffer from non-communicable disease, diabetes, hypertension, from cancer, because overall, I think everybody comes to the realization that a healthy economy comes from a healthy population and that no patient should be left behind.
We often talk about this. We talk about no patient left behind. We talk about the fact that, you know, the health of the whole is as important as the weakest link.
Yes.
But the reality of it is in many countries across the world, we have the SDGs. The SDGs were most probably going to offshoot despite the fact that we've got ambitious 2030 goal and we have a place where no one is left behind for health. But the reality of the situation is I don't think we're going to get there. It's not because I'm trying to be, I suppose, negative about it. It's because that coming out of COVID, the inequalities that have set the stage to where we want to be is now changing the dynamics of how we need to behave. You brought up some really important points. You said first, low awareness. You said the talk about burden of care, and this is an important point which I think many countries are now beginning to see, that rare diseases are not just about health. Mm-hmm. You also spoke about insufficient diagnosis, and we see this very much so in a lot of the emerging countries that are now beginning to make bigger strides on rare disease, and definitely different levels in that journey. So for example, we've got the European reference networks in Europe, but ASEAN is not as homogeneous as the EU. So the ways in which we reach out to do things are very different. So let's talk about barriers to access. When we talk about main barriers to access when it comes to innovation and medicine and helping the community and looking at larger scale population, knowing that ASEAN or even Asia put together is a really big population of the world that is yet to be served in the way that we can say is equitable. So what are the particular regulatory, economic, logistical hurdles that you feel stand out here, which we need to perhaps address a little better?
I think you're raising an important point, because when you think about the Asia-Pacific region, this is 60% of the world population. Mm-hmm. And yet, I'm sure there's an infinite proportion of patients who are being recognized with their rare disease and getting access to one of the few available treatments. However, you mentioned the European Reference Network. Europe, 30 years ago, started at the same point. Hospitals were not talking to each other, and there was no collective, I would say, or joint effort to put data together to build that critical mass. So I think there is an opportunity for the Asia area to build a similar network based on the common goal. So it's not going to be under a European umbrella, but it can be around under the regional Asia umbrella. And there are forums for that, and there are even patient groups that are also anchored into the Asia-Pacific region, such as ABDUL. So I think that now that everybody realizes that those patients need some attention because the impact of their disease goes beyond those few individuals. Now that we realize that the research that is being undertaken for some rare disease patients, especially rare diseases, especially those with genetic origin, benefit sometimes more prevalent indication that have also some of that genetic background, we realize that it is just part of one value chain, and that those patients and the investment done in research for those rare disease benefits ultimately the overall community. So I'm trustful that the progress that we have seen in other parts of the world and the success that we have seen in the fact that now there are treatments available for many indications, now that there are around 500 orphan drug designation in Europe, all of this took 30 years to happen. So I'm confident that those successes and those achievements serve as a benchmark or as a positive example that Asian countries can follow. But I'm confident that this will be done in a more, in a quicker way, in an accelerated way. Why? Because here we have an example of what good looks like, which Europe and US did not have before, and also because now we are in a global world. Physicians are connected through digital means, through medical societies. People travel to congresses, they connect, and therefore the learnings are much quicker to arrive. And obviously, I think across the board, there is this realization that it takes a village for this to happen, which again did not exist 30 years ago. So there are now patient advocacy groups represented globally, like the Rare Disease International, regionally, like ABDUL. There are actors such as ourselves, drug developers, who are willing to partner with physicians, with patient advocacy group, and with policymakers, because ultimately, talking about accelerating access, access is a shared responsibility with the health authorities and the governments becoming aware about the issue and making political choices to make the space for those few hundred and few thousand
So
patients.
if we're talking about acceleration, one of the things that I think is key when we talk about this is not only just learning about good practices, because very often we hear at conferences talking about best practice, but the reality of it is learning about what doesn't work or what did not work in one particular geography or a case helps others to learn how not to repeat the same mistake. And I think lessons learned are equally as important, especially in areas where you don't have as much research or study that's being done for the number of cases and the number of diseases that are necessary. And we find that particularly in Southeast Asia, learning from these missteps, as I would say, rather than successes, is definitely a way to go. We learned this during COVID. We knew what didn't work and how quickly we did to turn around. Now, I want to go into a thorny subject, but I think it's an important one. Let's talk about pricing strategy and affordability. When we talk about rare diseases, the perception, rightly or wrongly, is that orphan drugs are expensive, it's not affordable, it is something that has been an equitability issue that has been talked about since time immemorial. But can you walk us through actually what is the general pricing strategy considerations that any pharma would have to go through when they're talking about orphan drugs? And to what extent does the pharmaceutical industry actually have that leverage to decide the price points in whatever other external factors that you might have to consider?
Okay, so I think I will have to start with the beginning, is that the investment in developing a new product, starting from preclinical studies and then the various clinical studies that need to take place, is the same whether this drug is going to be for a small population or for a large population. Studies can be slightly smaller than, of course, if you were to develop a drug in hypertension or diabetes, but they will still need to happen with the right quality and standards, and also it will take those 8 to 10 years of time for this to happen.
8 to 10 years?
Yeah, 8 to 10 years. And then similarly to, I would say, every research and development effort, some will succeed, so which means that from the initial scientific hypothesis to finally, do we have a drug? Yes, that works, yes or no. Some will succeed and some will fail. But that's investment in addition to the global commercialization effort, distribution effort, has to be done irrespective of whether this is a small scale population or a large-scale population. So unfortunately for rare diseases, the technologies that are needed sometimes to drive that innovation that is life-saving, of life-transforming, sometimes require sophisticated technologies. It's mainly biologics. You have heard about some gene therapy and gene editing technologies being developed to provide even a cure for some of those rare diseases. But there is no economy of scale, which means all that effort and investment is for few hundred, few thousand patients. So, but I would like to be here positive to say, but I'm hopeful that as now this problem of rare disease patient is being elevated at above national level with the UN resolution in 21, with the upcoming WHA resolution next year, for which Malaysia is a co-sponsor, and congratulations for that. I mean, the more we get patient diagnosed, the more we get disease awareness, that's the first step. The more we get patient diagnosed, the more we get patients being treated and potentially eligible to treatment, the more we will get that progressively economy of scale that today does not exist, and that also explain why those products are more expensive than when you produce a paracetamol pill, for example, for the 8 billion human people who live on Earth. So I think that's also part of the equation, in addition to the sometimes complexity of the technology that is behind the innovation.
I think it would be interesting to see how we can take perhaps lessons learned during COVID, despite the fact that that did have the economies of scale because the number of people who were affected. But the speed in which we were able to collaborate, despite the fact that there were guardrails to ensure that whatever that was put to market was actually safe for human consumption and safe for the people that we wanted to help. So with that, there was huge collaborative effort that was done not only by policymakers but also industry players, everything from research coming together. So specific to collaboration, and I believe that for rare diseases, collaboration with the government is key in any agency or any form of rare disease. So what are some of the strategies that AstraZeneca has employed, at least to date, to collaborate effectively with healthcare systems that are existing to ensure that issues of rare diseases, you said and you mentioned several countries are at different parts of the journey. In Malaysia, alhamdulillah, through the Ministry of Health, has set aside annual funds for rare diseases, and we've still got a long way to go, but we're definitely moving and charging ahead. But what specific partnerships in Southeast Asia perhaps you believe yield the most promising results?
So I think first of all, to your point, my visit to our teams here in Southeast Asia and also some engagement with some Ministry of Health representative, is a way to show that we are committed to partnership, and we are committed to share. We don't have a local solution for each country, but we are willing to share what we have learned, to your point, that has worked, that did not work. Because and back to my earlier point, I think this opportunity can enable an accelerated journey in Asia versus the 30 years that took for Europeans to get to where we are today, even though there's still more to go. So we are committed to the type of partnership, are already to commit personally to share everything that we have learned, everything that has worked, that didn't work. Second, to raise the points that are important drivers to create and build a favorable ecosystem for rare diseases. And the access and the funding is the last part of a value chain, of a journey that needs to start. Do physicians know about the disease? Yeah. And I can speak about it because many of the diseases for which now we have available treatments, I did not study them in medical school. And therefore, I'm thinking, okay, we are sharing the need for how can we raise awareness, not only at the general population level, but within the medical community, so that in addition to the few experts and specialists who, of course, are knowledgeable and who know about it, how can we have more physicians thinking about those diseases so that they refer them quickly to the national centers, or they are able to diagnose them themselves. So that's the first type of partnership that we, for example, put in place. And then if I have to jump now immediately to the access part, we come to an agreement in the countries where we obtain national reimbursement. That's an agreement that we come into with the national authorities on, okay, here are our treatments, how can we find an agreement between the two parties for your patient to get access to it in a way that they don't have to pay from their pockets, because I think that would be not equitable to them. They are already suffering from something that obviously birth lottery has exposed them into, but also in a way that will enable all patients of that country to get access in an equitable way.
Could you share perhaps some of the global advocacy programs that AstraZeneca is working on? Because you did say, there are several programs. Could you share real examples of what are some of these programs?
Programs are mainly at country level, but they are following a similar framework. So when talking about disease awareness, so we engage in, okay, how do we ensure raising the awareness of this disease? And then we look at the patient journey and the diagnostic pathway. What prevents this patient to be diagnosed? Sometimes it's just the knowledge of the disease, but sometimes there is an assay, a test that does not exist in the country. So then the partnership is, okay, how do we get the machine, the assay, the reagents, and the tech transfer into one of the academic hospitals that is willing to become that national lab that will run those assays, so that patients get those tests quicker and also get those results. Because giving you some examples, we have many countries where some of the assays don't exist. They have to send patient samples to another country, and it takes 2 weeks. And over the trip, the sample gets hot and cold, and so the results are not necessarily. So this could be one of the partnerships. So you see, it's very much customized to the needs. But then above country level, the type of partnerships we have are, for example, when there are regional organizations like ABDUL, like Eurodis. ABDUL, that's for Asia Pacific, and Eurodis, that's for Europe. There's also the North America Rare Disease Organization. So these are the type of also.
How important are regional networks like this, like ABDUL, Eurodisnot, how important are they in trying to ensure that there are real in-country work? Because we know that right on top you've got, pharma, you've got countries, you've got WHO, you've also got Rare Disease International, and then you've got a lot of all these regional networks. But the real crux of it, whether or not any of these efforts are going to be effective or not, really stands on whether the person on the ground receives the help. So how effective are these regional networks?
But that's why I was telling you, as first, our partnership are at country level, because the needs are different, the gaps are different, and it's important to bridge the gaps for that particular country. And I'll just give you an example. I was having a meeting today with the representative of the Ministry of Health, and they told me about the accelerated regulatory approval in Malaysia, where it has been shortened from 24 months to 9 to 12 months, and to accelerate the regulatory approval of drugs for rare diseases. Okay, so here it's being addressed. There has been a political action and a decision made to accelerate. There are countries where it's not the case, where the regulatory process, like I should not be mentioning them, but will take 2 years, 3 years, like Turkey. And therefore there our partnership is around how can you feel comfortable approving a drug that has been approved by FDA, by EMEA, by other countries? What is it that will make you comfortable to accelerate that approval for your patients, so that when an innovation comes in, and we know how long it takes for this to be confirmed as being efficacious and safe, so that you don't, for your patients, your citizens, they don't wait another.
I think the patients are also asking the same thing, like how do we expedite? Because I've spoken to patient groups saying, we have these drug that's available in other countries and it's FDA approved, but unfortunately it's not approved in our country, whatever that country might be. Now, chugging ahead before we end time, Malaysia's role in ASEAN and the WHO. You mentioned earlier during the conversation that Malaysia is now one of the co-sponsoring countries, and that's something that we're really happy about, to co-sponsor the World Health Assembly resolution on persons living with rare diseases. And I believe that this is a landmark move by the Ministry of Health as well as the government of Malaysia to stamp its mark in saying, yes, we are committed for people living with rare diseases and we have to do something together. But what strategic actions do you feel should countries consider to drive this better, so that the WHO eventually, when we do get there, it's not just a nice piece of declaration that doesn't actually do what it's supposed to do?
No, I think that's a very good point. And I think Malaysia has a leadership opportunity at regional level, not only for the rare disease patient in Malaysia, but also for the whole region, being co-sponsor of the WHO resolution. I think it is important to, in whatever resolution or call for global action plan that will be issued from this discussion at WHO level, is to be clear on what are the drivers to create and build a favorable ecosystem for rare disease. The first one will be the disease awareness. Okay, how do we update the curriculum of the medical schools so that they know? And then,
I love that.
Okay, and I can speak by experience. If I was now to come back, I would say, can you add this into the program?
Yes.
And then for the existing physicians, how do we educate them on the diseases that are rare, that are now can be diagnosed? Some have a treatment, some have a treatment underway, because there are a lot of clinical trials. So the second part is what we call the medical readiness. Is the healthcare ecosystem wired, once a patient is probably suspected, to go to the national center of reference, which means we need national center of reference. We need center of excellence. We need some, I would say, expert physician to champion and say, okay, any question you have on this disease, please call me. I'm happy here to help you, because the knowledge and the data is so limited that it needs to be kind of owned by some expert that will champion those diseases. So you need that medical readiness. The diagnostic pathway. Do we have all the assays and the lab testing that is required for diagnosis? If not, okay, how can we again find a hospital willing to be the ones testing all patient samples? And then what are at the policy level? How do we accelerate regulatory approval? This is a government decision, right? Malaysia government took that decision in 2020. They made it happen. It's really about the political will. So how do we accelerate regulatory approval? And then how do we consider funding in an equitable way? Do we put a separate funding in place so that it's dedicated and it gives also certainty for given back to the budget consideration, certainty to each country on, okay, I'm going to spend this to get started, because we need to get started somewhere. Or should we have this included in national coverage? So there are countries who have decided that. Some consider a contribution from patients, some consider no contribution for patient. So those funding also solutions have to be, so 5 policy drivers have to be part of the action plan that hopefully Malaysia and others will be putting forward to WHO.
So you said driving a favorable ecosystem, centers of reference and pathways to champion not only local champions but also centers of excellence, political will and acceleration of regulatory approval, and of course not forgetting the diagnostic pathway. My goodness, there's quite a lot of things to fix. However, it's really good to hear that these are the things that are already in place to some extent in many of the countries. So as we wrap up today's discussion, I believe one thing is definitely clear. Addressing the unmet needs of rare diseases and patients requires a joint action. And you mentioned from raising awareness all the way to improving diagnostic times. We need to be better than just 4 to 5 years. And all the way to looking at how do we enhance access to life-saving treatments that drive supportive policies, especially for equity. So let's keep the conversations going and let's spark hope and real change here in Malaysia and beyond. Thank you for joining us on The Nation. I'm NADIAH, and until next time, stay informed and engaged. Take care.